A Scottish welcome for an Australian Prime Minister, here to see a Commonwealth King, through the gates of Balmoral Castle and a chat with Charles III. Over a formal meeting followed by lunch, the monarch and the boy from Marrickville canvassed an uncertain global outlook.
It was splendid. I've got to develop a relationship with him over recent years. We discussed events in Australia, but also the context of the uncertainty that's there in the world.
A visit to the local church too, at the suggestion of King Charles. His mother, Queen Elizabeth, was a regular attendee here. He may be a Republican, but the Prime Minister is in no hurry to hold another referendum. He's come a long way to have lunch with the King of Australia.
Mate, strap yourself in, because what I'm about to spill is going to rattle some cages, and I don't mean just a polite stir over a sausage sizzle at Bunnings. This is the kind of bombshell that makes Aussies spit out their morning coffee and wonder if the mob running Canberra have completely lost the plot. Forget the polished speeches. Forget the photo ops with world leaders looking like they've just stepped out of a Hollywood flick. Because when you strip it all back, what we've got is a Prime Minister more obsessed with polishing his reputation overseas than actually fixing the mess in his own backyard. And Barnaby Joyce, for all his flaws and chaos, just ripped the band-aid clean off, exposing a wound that Albanese has been desperately trying to cover with glossy headlines and global selfies. Before we tear into this Albanese sellout scandal, where Barnaby drops a political nuke, Albo's busy chasing a UN job, and Aussies are left holding sky-high bills, smash that like button like you're slamming the door on another overseas junket. Subscribe if you're sick of Canberra's circus. And grab the "Who Voted for This" shirt, links in the description. You see, while Albo was strutting around at the United Nations, puffing out his chest about climate leadership and acting like Australia was some kind of superhero in a cape, ordinary Aussies back home were sitting in the dark, staring at power bills so high you'd think the electricity was being piped in from the bloody moon. Barnaby didn't mince his words. He flat out said, no one cares about Albo's UN performance. And you know what? He's bloody right. Because when you can't afford to keep the heater on in winter, when your mortgage is chewing through half your wage, when your kids are living out of share houses that cost more than your first home loan, do you really give a toss about some speech in New York? And let's be real here, this isn't just about one boring speech at the UN. This is about a Prime Minister who's lost touch with the beating heart of Australia. The bloke who grew up in Marrickville, raised by a single mum, the everyman story he loves to spin. He's not that battler anymore. He's jetting around in VIP planes, having royal lunches at Balmoral with King Charles, talking global uncertainty while Aussies can't even figure out if they'll be able to fill the fridge next week. That's not leadership, that's theatre. And Barnaby, as rough and unpredictable as he is, called it out with the kind of raw honesty that cuts through all the spin. But here's where it gets properly controversial. Because behind Joyce's rant, there's a growing whisper, one that Albanese and his crew don't want you to hear. The whisper is that Albo doesn't actually care about solving the cost of living crisis, the housing nightmare, or the energy disaster. Why? Because those problems don't earn him claps and standing ovations on the world stage. He wants a legacy, a shiny plaque that says Anthony Albanese, the Prime Minister who turned Australia into a renewable energy superpower. Meanwhile, the battlers in Dubbo, Wagga, and Perth are just numbers in a spreadsheet. Disposable. Forgettable. Left behind. And if you think that's harsh, look at the timing. Inflation's still choking families, interest rates are brutal, housing's cooked, and the government's answer? A few half-baked schemes that don't even scratch the surface. Meanwhile, billions are being promised to international climate funds, military alliances, and foreign aid packages. Albanese is playing world diplomat, while mums and dads are lining up at food banks. You don't need a PhD in politics to see what's happening. The bloke's building a resume for life after politics. UN job? Global climate chair? Some cushy gig with a fat paycheck and no accountability? Don't act surprised. That's where the breadcrumbs lead, and Barnaby just shoved the trail right under our noses. And here's the kicker. Barnaby himself isn't clean. This is a bloke who's had more scandals than a reality TV star. Yet, somehow, when he calls out Albanese for being more interested in handshakes overseas than handouts at home, people actually nod along. That's how far Albo's credibility has fallen. Even Barnaby, with his chaotic past, looks like the voice of the people compared to the bloke in the PM's chair. And that's not just embarrassing, it's dangerous. Because when Aussies start thinking their leaders don't care, they don't just lose trust, they lose faith in the whole bloody system. And let me tell ya, that's when things turn ugly. That's when populist figures rise up, when conspiracy theories find fertile ground, when the gap between Canberra and ordinary Australia becomes a chasm so wide you couldn't jump it with a rocket. Albanese's obsession with international acclaim isn't just annoying, it's creating the perfect storm for a political and social backlash like we haven't seen in decades. Now here's where I'm gonna leave it hanging for now, because what Barnaby hinted at, and what the mainstream media refuses to dig into, goes way deeper than just a boring UN speech. It ties into secret deals, quiet conversations with global elites, and a roadmap that could reshape Australia in ways most of us never voted for. And trust me, once you see where this all leads, you'll never look at Albanese or Canberra politics the same way again. Alright mate, let's RIP straight back in, because if you thought Barnaby's swipe at Albo's UN antics was a cheap jab, you've only heard the tip of the iceberg. The real dirt, the kind that makes backroom staffers sweat bullets and spin doctors work overtime, is what was left unsaid. Because Joyce wasn't just taking a swing for headlines, he was hinting at something far bigger, that Albanese's government is tied up in promises, deals, and quiet nods to global players that make ordinary Aussies nothing more than collateral damage. And here's the wild part. Most of it's happening behind closed doors, with very little debate, very little accountability, and almost zero transparency. Think about this. Why is it that every time Albo hops on a plane to the US, the UK, or Europe, he comes back with another agreement that costs us billions? AUKUS, renewable commitments, aid pledges. They're all dressed up as investments in Australia's future. But when you strip away the glossy brochures and diplomatic grins, what you've really got is Australia footing the bill for someone else's agenda. And it's not just Barnaby who's smelling the stench here. Quietly, even some Labor backbenchers are grumbling, because they can see their electorates crumbling under rent hikes, mortgage stress, and empty wallets, while their leader's busy trying to be the star pupil at the global school of virtue signaling. And let's not forget, this obsession with climate credibility on the world stage, it's coming at a price that would make your head spin. Albo bangs on about being a renewable energy superpower, but the transition is being rammed down our throats faster than the infrastructure can handle. Coal plants shutting down before replacements are ready, energy grids wobbling, costs skyrocketing. And who cops it the worst? Ordinary punters, tradies trying to keep their workshops running, families deciding whether to cook dinner or keep the lights on. Meanwhile, global audiences clap politely at Albo's speeches, but those claps don't pay power bills. And here's the spicy bit, because whispers in Canberra suggest Albanese is laying the groundwork for a cushy international gig once he's done here. A UN climate envoy role, maybe even some grand position at a global foundation. The sort of thing where you wear sharp suits, fly business class, and give keynote speeches to rooms full of people who've never seen an Aussie farm or copped a $600 energy bill. If that's true, then every move he's making now, every speech, every overseas handshake, isn't about us. It's about him. His legacy, his reputation, his golden parachute when this whole mess comes crashing down. Now, you'd think that'd be enough to trigger outrage on its own. But here's where Barnaby's comments took a darker turn, because he wasn't just calling Albo out for being disconnected. He was hinting that certain policy decisions are being influenced, even shaped, by international interests who see Australia not as a sovereign nation, but as a resource-rich chess piece on their board. Think about it. Critical minerals, gas, coal, even our land and water rights. Foreign companies and governments are circling like sharks. Deals are being struck that make the headlines sound like partnerships. But in reality, we're selling off the farm while the bloke in charge is too busy practicing his next UN soundbite to notice. And here's where I'll put it bluntly. Australians are being treated like mugs. While Albanese pats himself on the back for making friends with world leaders, Barnaby and others are pointing out that housing is in crisis, hospitals are buckling, and regional towns are being hollowed out. Yet, somehow, there's always billions lying around for overseas commitments, defense deals, and international funds. Why? Because those things look good in press releases. They build your global reputation. They make you look like the responsible statesman. But they don't fix the potholes in Dubbo or keep a small business in Cairns afloat. And you want more drama? Here's one for ya. Behind the scenes, even some Labor insiders reckon Albo's UN address was more about setting himself up than setting Australia up. They say he spends more time worrying about what Joe Biden or Keir Starmer thinks than what the average voter in Penrith thinks. And that's a bloody scandal. Because the people who put him in office weren't international elites. They were Aussies who thought he'd bring back fairness, fight for working families, and ease the cost of living crunch. Instead, they got a bloke who treats the PM's job like a stepping stone to his next gig. And don't think Barnaby's the only one noticing. Regional Australia has been grumbling for years that they're being left behind, but now even suburban battlers are starting to see it. Food banks are overflowing, young families are drowning in rent, and retirees are going back to work just to pay the bills. And yet, every time Albo opens his mouth, it's about climate pledges, international partnerships, and Australia's role in the global community. Well, newsflash, the global community doesn't pay your mortgage. The global community doesn't lower your grocery bill. The global community doesn't make sure your local GP isn't booked out for 3 weeks straight. And the kicker? The media plays along. Oh, they'll give Barnaby a headline or two because he's colourful and unpredictable. But the deep dive? The hard questions? Nah, they don't want to rock the boat. Because global engagement makes for glossy photos, and glossy photos sell papers and pull clicks. But you know who loses out. Ordinary Aussies who can see through the smoke and mirrors, who know deep down that they're being shafted. Now, I'll say this before wrapping up. This isn't just about one Prime Minister or even one party. It's about the culture in Canberra where politicians forget who they're really working for. It's about the creeping influence of global agendas that don't line up with Aussie values or priorities. And it's about the danger of leaders who care more about applause in New York than voices in Newcastle. Barnaby Joyce, for all his scandals and chaos, just ripped the mask off. And once you've seen what's underneath, you can't unsee it. So here's the brutal truth. Unless Australians start demanding accountability, unless we stop swallowing the spin and start asking where our money's really going, we're gonna wake up in a country we barely recognize. A country sold off bit by bit, while the bloke who was meant to protect it is sipping champagne at a UN gala, smiling for cameras that aren't ours. That's not leadership. That's betrayal. And it's happening right under our noses. See you in the next one. And don't forget to smash that like button like you're slamming the door on another overseas freebie trip for Canberra's elites. Oi, and if you're really fired up, grab the "Who voted for this" shirt, wear it to the next rate hike meeting, the next town hall protest, or just when you're handing over $10 for a flat white while wondering why your tax dollars are patching up someone else's backyard instead of ours. Stay loud, stay awake, and never stop fighting for the Australia we bloody deserve.